Again, now as Comair battles serious financial difficulties, there are concerns workers could lose their jobs. The airline is said to be in urgent need of investors, or it could have its wings clipped forever. Its management met with trade unions to discuss what currently looks like a bleak future. And tracking that story for us this hour is Heidi Giokos. She's with us in the studio. Heidi, good afternoon. I see that there was a meeting yesterday with various parties, and it's emerging that, according to the unions as well, that this airline, Comair, is in real trouble, serious trouble.
Yes, indeed, Bradan. I think a lot of it was underplayed because, of course, Comair needs to portray an image to say we've got this under control, but that's not really what unions and other stakeholders were told yesterday during a meeting with business rescue practitioners and the CEO of Comair, Glenn Osmond. According to, for example, NUMSA, who has quite a few members that work for Comair, they were told that the airline, within a matter of weeks, could start winding down if they do not get an investor. The unfortunate part about all of this is that we do not know how much is actually needed for Comair to start its operations once again. We know that flights were suspended at the end of May. It was voluntary suspension by Comair, but it seems as though there's no clear indication what financial distress the airline is in. All we know is that if they do not get an investor in the next couple of weeks, it seems as though the airline could wind down. That does not look good, of course, for workers, but NUMSA also saying that it seems as though there is no strategy to try and get an investor and to try and get this airline working again. It was placed in business rescue. COVID, of course, really impacting this airline because aviation was on its knees because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But it just seems as though it was unable to pick itself up. Let's listen to what NUMSA had to say about this.
The attitude of the business rescue practitioner, Richard Ferguson, is one where we do not get a sense from Richard Ferguson that he is energized or that he is doing everything possible to save this airline. The attitude that you get is an attitude of obstinance, of stubbornness, of a refusal to cooperate, to be transparent, to bring all stakeholders into his confidence and be frank and honest about the efforts that they've made. As Labour, we certainly felt as if we were the ones who want this airline to be sustainable more than they do. We are fighting more than they are. And it's worrying. It's worrying because the message that we got from the meeting yesterday is that this airline is weeks away from being wound down if they do not find an investor.
And in this industry, post the pandemic, Heidi, it's not easy to find investors. I mean, even with SAA, with government backing as an equity partner, to try and find and seal SAA's future in terms of a new strategic equity partner, they still have not really found it. There's progress now, as we've been told, by Pravin Gordon and also the other equity partners. But, I mean, being Comair is going to be very, very, very challenging. So the future is bleak. And Paramile Hlubimajola there from NUMSA saying it looks like it's going to fall. So what does it mean for workers?
It's a very big concern for workers. We're talking about over 1,000 workers at Comair. What does this mean for them moving forward? But also, Bradan, what does this mean for their salaries? We know that the airline suspended flights at the end of May, but what does this mean for their June salaries, their July salaries, if the airline doesn't start flying anytime soon, which the likelihood it's not there. It doesn't seem as though the airline is going to fly anytime soon unless they find an investor, which you just mentioned is not very easy in this current environment. But we got a chance to speak to Solidarity. They have about 500 members that work for Comair. They've indicated to us that it's very concerning, and they've decided now to apply to the UIF to try and see if they can get any kind of assistance for workers because everything is just uncertain at this stage. What's also interesting, and we're going to hear from Solidarity now, is they believe that should the airline get an investor, it doesn't necessarily mean that flights are going to take off immediately. It's going to take some time for an investor to come in, put in money, for there to be a strategy plan.
And those two, as remember, due diligence.
Exactly.
You don't just come in and put in your money without due diligence. It might take even longer.
Yes, and you need to make sure that you're not going to fall into the same position again where you are in financial distress. But we got a chance to speak to Solidarity. Let's listen to what they had to say about this.
So I think, let's assume that Comair does, well, it was stated by the business rescue practitioner that even if there is a likelihood of receiving funding or an additional investor, the airline may only be in a position to resume operations as late as September. And obviously, it's fair to assume that no employee would be able to survive such a break in service without any form of income. So what the parties have done to this extent is to encourage the company to approach the UIF to ensure that they can either make a short-time application or an application in terms of layoff. Also, we've requested that the company engage with the CCMA with regards to their training layoff scheme. And those are really fundamentally the things that we can bring to the table at the moment. A lot of this is beyond the control of the trade unions or the employees themselves.
I think it's a good proactive thing that, is, as you say, Solidarity is doing as a trade union to apply to UIF, because you just don't know what's going to happen if things are looking so bleak. So Comair itself, Mr. Glenn Osmond and his team there, what do they say?
We haven't heard from them, Braden. We reached out to them yesterday as well as today and asked them to respond to the fact that the unions are saying that it's within a matter of weeks before the airline could possibly wind down or need an investor. And they've said to us there isn't much more to say. They are in talks, and that when they're ready, they will reach out. But it's a big problem because you have passengers who've booked on Comair, Kulula and British Airways, wanting to know what to do with their tickets, wanting to know if they're going to get a refund. So it's important for airlines to come out and speak and say, we're dealing with the matter, this is where we are, please be patient, or we're uncertain of what the future looks like, but we'll communicate as soon as something happens. So we'll just have to keep pushing and hopefully they'll speak.
Thank you very much. Heidi Giokos with the latest day around about the fortunes or misfortunes of Comair and the impact, of course, on workers and the travel industry.